And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning with me, your host, Black Box Ned. And because today is Tuesday, you guys can say hello to Snoopy here. How's everybody doing? Looks like we have a couple people in the chat. We have Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. That's Jerome. Hey, how's it going? And we have Mike here, Mike Frazzi. He says hello and hi. Hi to you too, Mike. True Crime Talk Radio is a segment that I do on Black Box Online Radio where I can talk about multiple subjects within a single episode. And I'm going to devote the majority of this episode to be talking about the DB Cooper suspect, John Emil List. And also, every Friday on Black Box Online Radio, I do an episode about DB Cooper. Cooper Friday, if you will. But because this is True Crime Talk Radio, I just have something very small to start with. I found this channel on YouTube called Radio Reddit. Yes, me, I found it. My amazing discovery. And Radio Reddit is something that is a little bit addictive. I think it's just the way that the host narrates the program and so on. It might even be a computer generated voice. It sounds a little bit computer generated, but they were telling the story of the Boston bombers, Tamerlan and Zakhar Tsarnaev. One person was actually a former teacher of Zakhar Tsarnaev, one of the Boston Marathon bombers. And this teacher, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, this teacher said that, he was a little bit quiet, but other than that, he seemed absolutely normal. And the people that knew him personally were just absolutely shocked that this guy was a participant in the Boston bombing, just saying that, no, they've got the wrong guy. There's no way that somebody like that would commit a crime of that nature. The Boston Marathon bombing, guess what? People are able to hide their dark sides. Some people are extremely good at hiding their dark sides. And on Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, I release shorts that mostly talk about serial killers. And frequently, I encounter these stories of people who are just like absolutely shocked that so and so could have been a serial killer. There's nothing too shocking about it. Just because someone doesn't show their feelings in an external way does not mean they do not have homicidal tendencies, destructive tendencies, criminal tendencies, even desires for power and so on that are not criminal. Lots of people have certain experiences and feelings and sinister notions that are going on within them that you won't know about. Agatha Christie wrote this in her play The Mousetrap. You never know what anyone is truly thinking or what anyone is really like. And we have William Kane here. He says, hi, Ned. Hello to you too, William Kane. You can get a cheers from Snoopy on True Crime Talk Radio because today is Tuesday. But we are going back to November 24th of 1971. On that day, D.B. Cooper boarded a plane heading from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington, which was supposed to be a 36-minute flight. And on that plane, he gave a note to a stewardess saying that he had a bomb. A couple of events happened in between that, but he opened up a briefcase that he was carrying and revealed what appeared to have been a bomb. And he hijacked the plane. He was a skyjacker. And D.B. Cooper demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes as a form of ransom. And he parachuted into the night with the money and the bomb and a bag that nobody knows the contents of but him, never to be seen or heard from again, according to some people. I think there are very few people in the world that believe that John Emil List was D.B. Cooper, but John Emil List was a real criminal. And I had the opportunity to listen to an interview that was done with Joe Sharkey on the Cooper Vortex with Darren Schaefer, where he's talking all about the real-life criminal John Emil List. And this is one that really caught me off guard because I knew that John Emil List was a D.B. Cooper suspect. Back when I first started looking into D.B. Cooper, even before I did Cooper Friday, I went through the D.B. Cooper suspect list, just like anybody else. And I was looking at all the names, and there were 2 suspects that really stood out to me where I just had that, oh my God moment. What are you talking about? Why is this person even considered as a D.B. Cooper suspect? One of them was E. Howard Hunt, the Watergate conspirator, former CIA spy, for lack of a better term. And the second one was John Emil List, who was a family annihilator who killed his family and went on the run. Now, with E. Howard Hunt, I've actually taken a step forward. I've taken a step back from my original claims and a step forward toward recognizing that There are certain elements to the theory involving E. Howard Hunt being D.B. Cooper that are not completely baseless, and I have a standalone episode here about him on the channel called D.B. Cooper Suspect E. Howard Hunt Extended Edition. But I also have a short episode that was done on John Emil List, the person whom I will mostly be discussing in this episode. And that was just a short one. I've not taken any steps back on John Emil List. I think he's a rather bizarre D.B. Cooper suspect. But let's look at how he gets pulled into the mix. Number one, before November 24th of 1971, we have to go back to November 9th of 1971. November 9th is a very important date in the true crime world. It is the anniversary of the murder of Mary Kelly, the final victim of Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most brutal murder. But also, on November 9th of 1971, John Emil List murdered his family in New Jersey. He had his wife, one daughter, two sons, and his mother. He murdered his mother and left her in the attic, and he murdered his wife, and he brought her into more or less what is a room that's like the living room in his home. And they more or less had a Victorian-style mansion, so it appears when I look at the photos. But I'm not some type of architecture expert or some type of housing expert. I don't want to misstate the age or anything, but it looks like they had a mansion. And then John Emil List waited for his kids to come home from school. He even picked one of them up home and brought them home from school. He murdered them, and he placed their bodies on a sleeping bag in the living room. 4 bodies were in the living room. His wife, his daughter, 2 sons, and his mother was left upstairs because, as he would write out in a confession, he said she was too heavy to carry. John Emil List wrote a 4.5 or 5-page confession letter talking about all of the reasons why he did this, why he had committed the crimes, and it was directed toward the pastor of his congregation because John Emil List was raised as a Lutheran, and he felt that he was very much involved with the church, and he thought the church would demand an explanation. Ross Dogg's Broken Spirit is here, says 1971 was an eventful year. Absolutely. We still have the Zodiac Killer mailing letters into 1971. Good point, Ross. But as far as John Emil List goes, he is somebody who had a lot of conflicting reasons for doing this. Firstly, back in 2019, I watched an episode of Dr. Todd Grande's channel where he was talking about filicide, where somebody decides to murder their family. And for the purposes of this discussion here on Black Box Online Radio, I'm simply going to refer to John Emil List as a family annihilator. And Lacey is here, says, hey, Ned and chat. Hey, Lacey, how's it going? John Emil List was a family annihilator. He killed his family and went on the run. But what Dr. Todd Grande said in his video was that there are some typical reasons why people would commit the murders of their entire family. And one of them is called immortalization, or immortalizing their family, where they believe that things are not going to get any better. They're in a bad situation. Times are tough. Life is not as good as it used to be. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel, metaphorically speaking. So they murder their family because they want to send them to heaven. John Emil List fits into this concept of the family annihilation psychology because he is all about immortalizing his family. He wants to send them to heaven because they are dealing with financial troubles. They are dealing with what he called moral decay, and I'll talk a lot about that in a second. But that's ultimately what it sounds like to me. And John Emil List probably wouldn't even have disputed that. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is that video that I was watching wasn't specifically devoted to family annihilation. It was actually talking about the family annihilator Chris Watts. And Dr. Todd Grande made an interesting comment when he said that Chris Watts didn't fit into any of the major categories that you would think of psychologically when you're looking at a family annihilator. And I did a whole episode on Black Box Online Radio talking all about this very concept when I'm like, that's still immortalization, what Chris Watts did. It's just done in a different way. Immortalization, yeah, he's not trying to send them to heaven. To provide some background info, Chris Watts murdered his wife and 2 daughters, his pregnant wife, mind you, and he took the wife's body to an oil well, for lack of a better term, buried her in a shallow grave. He murdered his daughters and dumped their bodies into the oil. And he was also experiencing financial stress. He had another woman in his life. He wanted to move on. With Chris Watts, I believe it's the same concept, but totally different, right? What am I going at? He's thinking that things are not going to get any better. He is not going to improve the situation for the family. He either has to divorce his family and be poor and live a miserable life. Maybe he'll even lose the new girlfriend, or he can murder his family and move on. It's immortalization within his own mind, within his own memories. It's not going to get any better, so let's just end it now. And believe it or not, I found an episode of Forensic Files once that had a different family annihilator that was behaving in the exact same way. But with John Emil List, there's a very famous episode about him on Forensic Files. And I don't know if it's the most popular episode or something, but I had watched that episode maybe 4 times. So today, I decided to watch it a 5th. The reason why I say it's a popular episode is I used to watch Forensic Files all the time. I remember I was just sitting on my laptop once watching this episode about John Emil List, and then the next day, I walked through the living room in my family home, and my father was watching the Forensic Files episode about John Emil List on TV. The reason why this is such a famous episode of Forensic Files is a forensic artist and a forensic psychologist did some things right, and they caught the guy. John Emil List goes on the run for 18 years. After he murders his family, he then goes to John F. Kennedy Airport, and he leaves his car there. As they openly state on Forensic Files, there was no evidence that he took a plane anywhere. Not like there was evidence about planes and air travel in 1971. Hello, did D.B. Cooper use his real name when he got on the plane? I don't think so. But John Emil List actually took a train out to the Midwest and went through the Midwest and ultimately ended up in Colorado. He moved into a motel for a while, and then he began working as a kitchen assistant in a restaurant. And he was more or less an assistant cook, what it sounds like. He would be on the run for 18 years. He would remarry and then relocate to Richmond, Virginia, using the name Bob Clark. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to talk about a case that was rather cold on America's Most Wanted. And at the time, John Walsh, the host of America's Most Wanted, openly stated this, that he was hesitant to talk about a case that was 18 years old, where this person hadn't been seen in 17 or 18 years. He's hesitant, but they did anyway. But the problem was, though, all of the photographs that they had of John Emil List were 17 or 18 years old. So they contacted a forensic artist named Frank Bender, who was a sculptor. Bender, what a great name for a sculptor. And he made a forensic bust of what he expected John Emil List would have looked like. And he did this in conjunction with the psychological profiler Richard Walter, whom I've talked about a lot on Black Box Online Radio, and I can say some things about him later on in the episode. But with the bust, it was extremely accurate. They captured the details down to the type of glasses that John Emil List would have been wearing, because Frank Bender determined that, this guy probably wants people to think that he's smart. He probably wants people to think that he's very intelligent, and he's going to associate dark-rimmed glasses with being intelligent. Here's looking at you, Zodiac Killer. No joke. And sure enough, John Emil List did even wear almost the exact same glasses that were placed on the forensic bust that was shared on America's Most Wanted. Some people recognized it. They called the America's Most Wanted tip line, and they said, hey, we know who this guy is. He's using the name Bob Clark, and he lives in Richmond, Virginia. And John Emil List was captured. There's an interview with John Emil List that was featured on the Biography channel in one of their Notorious episodes. And if you look into this case on YouTube, it's one of the first episodes that comes up. And John Emil List is somebody who really doesn't seem to show a lot, if any, remorse for his family that he murdered, because it's quite similar to Chris Watts when he's just thinking all about himself or how it impacted him, or just, oh yeah, I did it and this is what happened, almost in an emotionless way. And we have Casbah here who says, good morning, just bought you a Java. Oh, Casbah, thank you so much. And Calpoke is here saying, catching up on 1.5 speed. Hey, welcome, Calpoke. Casbah says, just bought you a Java, meaning the page on buymeacoffee.com. If you guys want to help this channel out, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps everything. And I do Tuesday and Thursday live streams for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. I also do episodes about the Zodiac Killer on Monday, Jack the Ripper on Wednesday, and DB Cooper on Friday. And you can support these efforts on buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday, including you, Casbah. Thank you so much. You can also use the super chat and super thanks on YouTube. But as far as the activities of John Emil List, let's look at some connections that he might have to the DB Cooper case. Number one, yeah, okay, he's a dark-haired male, brown-haired male, rather tall, rather slender. He loved wearing a button-up shirt and a tie. He was even the type of guy that would mow his lawn wearing a button-up shirt and a tie. And something about John Emil List's behavior actually bothered his neighbors and his co-workers. It's almost as if he's trying to be very neat, but he came across as rather sloppy. And one thing that was stated on, I think, the biography in episode was that he lost multiple jobs in his life, not because of poor performance, but because of bizarre behavior. People didn't necessarily like working with him. So, number two, he's on the run. Number three, he took a train to the West and the Midwest and going through the direction of Oregon, as opposed to fleeing the country and going to Canada or Mexico. So he's headed in that direction. And let's see, we got November 9th of 1971 to November 24th of 1971. About 2.5 weeks later, DB Cooper does the heist. Just when John Emil List is starting out his endeavors to go on the run and go into hiding. Moreover, this guy withdrew at least $2,000 from the bank, so says Forensic Files, and maybe he wanted more money than that, so he's going to do something like skyjack a plane and demand the $200,000 that DB Cooper did. The points against John Emil List being DB Cooper. Number one, I think he looks nothing like the composite sketches. All right, I got you. Dark hair, tall and slender. Facially, I think John Emil List looks nothing like the composite sketches. Number two, DB Cooper was actually described as being polite and neat and formal and, well, certainly not the things that they were talking about with John Emil List if he's getting fired from jobs for weird behavior. And it sounds like he's just an awkward individual. And I don't really quite see DB Cooper being listed as awkward. And then we also have to bear in mind that John Emil List was captured. And this is the biggest strike against John Emil List being DB Cooper. He was caught. And he had the opportunity to confess. He was already going to prison for life without the possibility of parole. Why not just admit to being DB Cooper if he actually did it? A lot of strikes. And also, as I said, he went to Colorado as opposed to Washington State or Oregon. Now, those are some big strikes against John Emil List. I do think the story is extremely fascinating. And, there's a reason why Darren Schaefer chose to have Joe Sharkey on his podcast. Joe Sharkey is the author of the book Death Sentence about John Emil List. And John Emil List would actually go on to co-author his own book about his experiences called Collateral Damage. Such an annoying title. But with this interview that Joe Sharkey did, he was sharing some points as to why John Emil List may have actually murdered his family. Number one, it could have been not even so much financial trouble as it was he was frustrated with the behavior of his family members, very specifically his daughter. And this is the stuff that I mentioned that they brought up on the biography channel when they said the words moral decay. And I believe that actually came from John List, if I recall correctly. But they're saying that he committed these murders because of moral decay in his family. And Joe Sharkey is almost like, yeah, it was animosity toward his daughter. He believed that his daughter was caught up in the 1960s as opposed to the Lutheran Church. By that, I genuinely mean that the counterculture of the 1960s, she's behaving in a way that he didn't approve of. He felt that he had lost control of his family. And when you look at the people that John Emil List has murdered, yes, he murdered his two sons, but his mother, his wife, his daughter, you have to wonder if there's some type of animosity toward women going on there. However, John Douglas, the psychological profiler from the FBI, would list John Emil List as an organized offender. And I think that John Emil List falls very neatly into all of the psychological observations that John Douglas has made. When I was reading the book, The Cases That Haunt Us, I didn't read anything specifically about John Emil List, but all of the stuff is there. And I have multiple episodes about that book, one about Jack the Ripper, one about JonBenet Ramsey, and one about the Zodiac Killer. The Cases That Haunt Us is a book that covers many different subjects. Let's look at what John Douglas would say. Number one, when a family annihilator or a family member murders another victim, yes, they murder a victim. They murder another member of their family. When the victim is a member of their family, the bodies are often placed in a peaceful setting, and John Emil List appears to have done just that. He laid the bodies all in a row on a sleeping bag in one room, with the exception of his mother, because he said he was unable to lift her. And if he had, then he would have done that as well. And in the Forensic Files reenactment, they even showed John Emil List taking a white towel and covering the face of one of the victims. I also think that this is just completely in line with what John Douglas talks about. Number two, this appears to be a very organized type of offender. This does not appear to be anything to the point where there's just a moment that's where somebody snaps and they got to make a wild story to cover it up. Sometimes crimes like that happen. And in the Jeffrey MacDonald case that I've talked about here on True Crime Talk Radio, a lot of people believe that the motive for the Jeffrey MacDonald murders was that he was in an argument with his wife. Maybe he hit her and the daughter saw, or maybe he hit his daughter and the wife saw, and the situation just boiled over, and he ended up making a set of weird and crazy claims that some family intruders did it. I mean, that would mean that it was not a premeditated murder. Maybe. Jeffrey MacDonald was convicted, but he denies his innocence and everything. John Emil List, though, does not seem to be that type of person, and Joe Sharkey agreed with that. The guy that wrote the book, Death Sentence, about him. He's writing all of these things out about how he's just like, this is the kind of guy that would have sat down at the breakfast table with his family for weeks, knowing fully well that he was going to kill them. He picked his son up from school, drove him home to kill him. But because nobody knew what was going on, the whole family wasn't there, nobody found the bodies for a month. And that is one of the reasons why John Emil List was able to avoid the authorities. That is one of the reasons why John Emil List was able to stay on the run for 18 years. He had a 1 month head start. Those are the words of Forensic Files. And with this aspect of John Emil List's behavior, you really just have to wonder, though, how would no one be knocking on the door, coming inside, or, like checking up on their family? I mean, I guess this is in 1971. Like, people didn't have social media. They couldn't tell that, oh, so-and-so has not been online for 12 hours, now 24 hours, 3 weeks. Maybe, if somebody just kind of left town or something like that, you wouldn't think too much. I remember a little bit of that. I was born in 1988, and even in like 2000, 2001, some people would disappear off the face of the earth and you would never see them again. The person that sits next to you in class. But, with 3 children, you'd think that they have some friends and some type of social life. If the daughter's acting out in such a way that's bothering him, you'd think she would have people looking for her. But the bodies are not found for a month. And here's another thing, though. John Emil List turned the lights on in the house. He set the thermostat to 50 degrees to slow down the process of decomposition so no one would smell anything. And he turned a radio on and set it to a classical music station because he thought that an intruder might hear the music and not enter the house. Oh, the family's home, the lights are on, the music's playing. So if someone were trying to burglarize the house or enter the house, they would be tempted to walk away. And it seems like all of that stuff worked. But, what's so sad about this particular story is that on the biography episode, they stated that the primary reason why they believe that John Emil List committed these murders was because he was dealing with financial trouble and he was about to face bankruptcy. Of course, he didn't like his daughter's behavior, but when I read about John Emil List and when I've watched other videos about him in the past, most people say that, yeah, number 1, the money, number 2, morals. There was a stained glass ceiling in one of the rooms, and I don't necessarily know what a stained glass ceiling looks like. A stained glass window, sure. I mean, maybe it's almost like an overhang or something, but they said there was a stained glass ceiling in the house that was already present when he bought it, that was actually made by the jewelry company Tiffany's, and it was worth $100,000. And he could have just sold that and solved all of his financial troubles. But he didn't do that. That's another reason why I don't think that he's D.B. Cooper. John Emil List seems like someone who was not the brightest. And Joe Sharkey agreed with that. When he did the interview with Darren Schaefer, they were talking very specifically about how they did not want to call him intelligent. Joe Sharkey, who wrote the book on this subject, just said he was very reluctant to call John Emil List an intelligent person because he was the type of person who may have read newspapers. He may have digested the material from newspapers, but intelligent. Just because somebody is a heavy reader, that doesn't mean they're smart. I once knew this guy. Maybe you've had a similar experience, and I was talking about him with a mutual friend. It's like, he's a really smart guy. It's like, oh, wait. I shouldn't say that. He knows a lot about books and movies, about famous writers and famous filmmakers, and that's it. Because when it would come to decisions in his personal life, he's just all over the map, and he's erratic, and he is uncalculating, and he is just misinformed. With John Emil List, I think it was very similar. And this is something else that I've also had to learn, and nobody really tells you this stuff, but somebody might have a high IQ, and they might be very good in certain academic disciplines, but they might have absolutely horrible social skills. And it's not even to the point where they don't know how to socialize. They think that they do because they're very good at math or very good with the sciences. But human beings don't follow the same progression of that mathematics does. Like, it's not the same type of syllogism. Human behavior is less predictable. So they just get confused, and they get really weird, and they just do things that don't make a whole lot of sense. And Cat Daddy Steve says, UFC announcer, we are live. Yeah, we are indeed, Cat Daddy Steve. You got a cheers from Snoopy. Mike Frazzi says, scatterbrained is what people I know call that. Well, yeah. And to be fair, I'm a scatterbrained person. I experience it in a little bit of a different way, and I've really learned that over the past year, that I am pretty good at focusing on two things at once. Like, if somebody is talking to me, I can be listening to the television or listening to something on my computer or my phone. Maybe I've been scrolling Facebook on my phone, and I can completely follow the episode as well as follow the conversation. One goes in one ear, one goes in the other ear. Maybe you can accept that. Like, for years, I would have described myself as a scatterbrained person, but it's not so much like that. It's more or less that I have a limit on how many things I can focus on. Maybe it's 3. Like, I can focus on 3 things, and then once it gets to 4, then I start getting overwhelmed and distracted and so on, and that's when it turns to the chaotic mess. Cat Daddy Steve says, I'm a catterbrained person. The worst. I'm so sorry. So sorry, Cat Daddy Steve. But here's something interesting about John Emil List. I said that they did this episode about him on America's Most Wanted. One of the oldest cases, maybe the oldest case that they had talked about at the time. And John Emil List openly said this in his interview on the Biography channel, that he was an avid watcher of America's Most Wanted. He was somebody who openly chose to watch America's Most Wanted every week, and he also asked other people to watch the show. Hey, this program's great. You got to check this thing out. It's hosted by this guy named John Walsh. I think that is just an enormous level of arrogance. I think that that's just something that's on par with Chris Watts and David Berkowitz and people who are arrested that we know are guilty, that have written out confessions, that don't deny what they did. And then they're just trying to act like they're reformed, but they're not. They're trying to act like they have emotions for the victims, but they don't. The fact that he's telling people to watch this show, America's Most Wanted, and he's watching it regularly, it's twofold. Number 1, he wants to know if he's going to be there. Number 2, he's just gloating. He's just flaunting. He wants to tell himself over and over again, I committed this crime, and I'm not going to get caught. And this is something that's very bizarre in human behavior because somebody can be a regular father and family man for ages, right? Yeah, and all of a sudden they murder their family. It's exactly what I said at the beginning. Excuse me. But it is what I said at the beginning about how you don't necessarily know how somebody is concealing their dark side. Some people can have that type of time bomb mentality when they have internalized rage and it just comes out at the wrong moment. Other people can have a type of more calculating aspect to it where they feel that they've been betrayed, they feel that they've been mistreated, they feel that they've been let down by this group of people. And I think John Emil List would fall into that category. Then there was also a third one where someone could actually be experiencing a type of mental illness. I've been watching a lot of videos about interrogations recently, right before bed. Of course, as I said, I like to watch garbage before I go to bed. And some of it's not completely garbage, they're true crime stories. And one of them was the story of Sonny Kim, who murdered his sister. And he said that he just went into a dissociative like state, and he didn't use those exact words, where it felt like it wasn't even him there, and like he's almost just watching himself commit this crime, where he walked over to his sister and shot her. Originally he was planning on shooting his mother and father first because he thought that they would be the type that would hinder him from committing more violence, but it may have, he may have actually been telling the truth. And that was the ultimate conclusion of this episode about Sonny Kim, is that he might have been the type of person who is actually experiencing some type of psychological disconnect. It was a dissociative issue. And the reason why I say he might be telling the truth is he's been incarcerated, and he openly says that he might have done it again if he lets out. He might do it again if he gets let out. And by do it again means that it could happen at any time. He feels like he could just switch into this dissociative state where he's not really aware of what he's doing, or if he is, and it's like watching another person do this, like a multiple personality almost. He's unable to stop it. Cowpoke says, I'm reading that List set up alibis for the family's absence, so no one checked the house. Yeah, that would make sense, because you would think in 30 days that there would just be something. Friends are going to be looking for their classmates at school and so on. And, I get the stuff about you quit your job or something like that, and you're just like disappearing. But, I mean, he would have had to have set up alibis, to have nobody going into the house for a month with multiple dead bodies there. But I do want to come back to this point about how it appears that this is just an example of somebody who has this type of emotional disconnect, where he is just thinking that it doesn't really affect him. He did it, and he's acting like he cares, but no, he really maybe reached some type of breaking point, or perhaps it was always there. Perhaps he was always dealing with some type of emotional disconnect with other people, and it just came out because he felt he had been mistreated. Mike Frozzi says Jeffrey Dahmer said the same, but that he would black out instead. I don't know about Jeffrey Dahmer. With Jeffrey Dahmer, though, it really seems like he was more about power. The fact that he wanted to cannibalize his victims so they would never leave him, and that was the ultimate act of domination. You see, you can never trust these psychopaths. Remember that Jeffrey Dahmer is listed as level 22 on Dr. Michael Stone's hierarchy of evil. Level 22 meaning he's a psychopathic torture murderer. And he would someone who would torture his victims to death. And yes, Jeffrey Dahmer would do that, drilling holes in people's heads and pouring acid in there. Disgusting. But maybe he's telling the truth and he experiences these types of blackouts. Jeffrey Dahmer was also an extremely heavy drinker, and that was something that he started as a teenager. He would say that he's taking his medicine and get drunk at school, and by Dahmer's own admission, the only reason that he got caught was because he got too sloppy with the drinking. Now, I told you guys that I would come back to some things about the psychological profiler Richard Walter. Richard Walter is very famous for working with the Zodiac case. As I understand, he lives in Pennsylvania. And last year on the channel, I had the opportunity to interview Mike Rodelli, author of In the Shadow of Mount Diablo. And he has interacted a lot with the psychological profiler Richard Walter. And more or less, either Rodelli and Walter came to some type of agreement about certain things involving the Zodiac, that the Zodiac killer was a power assertive serial killer. And he asked me if I would, do some follow-ups with Richard Walter. I tried to contact him. I didn't hear anything back. Richard Walter's in his 80s now, so I think that he's retired. But there was a rather scathing article that came out in, I think, 2021 about Richard Walter, where it's talking about how, as a psychological profiler, he misrepresented his credentials, he misrepresented his capabilities, and he did a lot of things that were very unethical, and he may have impacted multiple cases by spreading disinfo around. However, when I was watching this episode of Forensic Files, it sounded like everything that he was spot on, everything that he was saying was spot on, because he was aiding and advising the forensic sculptor, Frank Bender, on what to do. And Frank Bender did a lot of it on his own because he's done this for years, to be fair. It was a team effort, and ultimately they got the right guy. So with Richard Walter, I think that he is a little bit hit or miss. Cowpoke says the same article says the wife was technically a shotgun wedding because they thought she was pregnant, and when she wasn't, sounds doomed from the start. Yes, they mentioned this in the Biography Channel documentary. What actually happens is that John Emil List may have felt duped into marrying his wife because of exactly what Cowpoke said, that she told him she was pregnant. He thought he was getting married because she was pregnant, but then it turned out that she wasn't pregnant. Okay, John Emil List. Why did you have 3 more children with her if you felt deceived and duped? Were you just the type of person who has this belief system that, nope, I've married her and I have to stay with her? I've heard people say that. I've heard people act that out. Did I say that? I've heard people say that. I've heard people claim that they're going to act that out, saying that, nope, even if I'm married and this person betrays me, I'm going to stay married. I've heard that. And did he just try to do that for a number of years until his mid-40s when he just realized enough is enough? I didn't want this life. I'm getting out. That could be something. That could be something. And, what's so odd is that I just said that, Joe Sharkey was very hesitant to call the guy intelligent, but the way that he planned his crime, there's a certain amount of methodical preparation that went into it. But as Calpo just said in the comment section, making fake alibis, turning on the radio and keeping the lights on, that stuff isn't brilliant. It's not rocket science. And also, this is what people don't really understand. Sometimes these criminals that get away with it are not masterminds. They are not people who are just some type of criminal genius. They are people who break the rules. That's one way you could look at John Emil List. Number 1, he was a liar. Number 2, he was somebody who just deceived a bunch of people. And, when they think that he's telling the truth and he's actually lying to them, that's the end of it. End of story. Mike Frozzi says, what do you think about the 2007 Zodiac movie? I think it's amazing. Very well done. There's some low points. There's some points where it dragged, like spending so much time talking about handwriting samples in a feature film. But, Mike, what I really think about the 2007 movie about Zodiac is that I'm just shocked about how influential that film was. Because the DVD version came out, and it had 2 accompanying documentaries on it. This is the Zodiac speaking, and his name was Arthur Lee Allen, and those have inspired countless sleuths on the internet. Those 3 things, the Fincher film and the 2 accompanying documentaries, have just awakened a new generation of true crime sleuths. The ripple effect from Zodiac from 2007 is enormous. And on the one hand, I'm a little bit surprised. On the other hand, I'm not. But the part of me that's surprised is like, well, we got a lot of movies that have been made about true crime cases, and I don't see the same sense of enthusiasm. For example, they made a Black Dahlia movie. I mean, not exactly at the same time, but I definitely remember when that came out, and I was like, oh, that Black Dahlia movie, I have to see it. It's called The Black Dahlia. I didn't see it. I've never seen it. Maybe I will in the future. But, like they made the movie From Hell with Johnny Depp, and I don't know if that movie, which is about Jack the Ripper, I don't know if it's inspired a generation of sleuths. It definitely got a lot of people talking. I remember when From Hell came out, which was based on a graphic novel. That definitely had some type of impact. Not as big as Zodiac from 2007. No, that is one that just really got to the core of human behavior. I think David Fincher is very good at what he does, and this is one thing that was written about him, is that David Fincher was somewhat of a Zodiac buff and Zodiac sleuth himself, and he said this. What did he say? He grew up riding some of the buses that the Zodiac threatened to blow up. He was on watch because of the Zodiac killer, so I completely get what he's saying about that. I'm gonna spend some time with Snoopy, but like with the story of Jack the Ripper, that's one case that has expanded into the realm of not only fiction but other movies. And there's so many films that have been made about Jack the Ripper in different directions. Like Jack the Ripper has even become the basis for other films, most notably The Lodger, the first film that was made about Jack the Ripper in 1927, an Alfred Hitchcock silent film. Absolutely amazing. And it's just like they also did the Man in the Attic, that's based on Jack the Ripper. There is a Jack the Ripper film from 1959, and I was just reading John J. Edelston's review of that in his book, Jack the Ripper, an Encyclopedia, and he's like, they didn't pay attention to historical accuracy. Well, of course they didn't. I mean, it's not supposed to be an accurate film. If you do watch the Jack the Ripper movie from 1959, it's historical fiction. Even the names of the victims are different. Let alone, you actually get to find out who Jack the Ripper was and why he did everything. Unsolved case. But Sherlock Holmes went up against Jack the Ripper in A Study in Terror. We don't see that with the Zodiac yet. Let's just say that the Zodiac killer is not at the level of Jack the Ripper. D.B. Cooper is not at the level of Jack the Ripper, where it's just completely commonplace to turn him into a fictional character. Mike Rossi says, 2007 movie got so much care put into it. It sure did. And, it was extremely thoughtful. And actually, I did an interview with Ross Geraci and Mike Morford. We appeared on Planet X Filmworks, Ross's channel, in 2021, and we were discussing the Fincher film. If you'd like to hear a full presentation, then like a full discussion for about like an hour and a half talking about the Zodiac film, that one might still be on the internet. Cowpoke says, the more I learn about Jack the Ripper, the more I think he's an unknown local who disappeared into the ether, either by dying or moving. Dying, moving, and I'll just grant one third possibility, confinement. It's possible that Jack the Ripper was confined to his home by his family members. He's slowly becoming worse and worse and worse. And after the murder of Mary Kelly, November 9th, 1888, 83 years before John Emil List committed the murders of his family to the day, then his family members were just like, nope, you can't go outside. They restrain him in some way, and he doesn't get out. Number two, he could have gone into the asylum extremely shortly after the murder of Mary Kelly. Some people think that the murderer of Mary Kelly just went absolutely berserk. And there's no way that this man could have returned to normalcy. He spent about 2 hours with Mary Kelly, dissecting her body, tearing her to shreds. And other people think that he just went back to work and nobody noticed. And those would be the people who are pushing a suspect like Montague John Druitt, who's just saying that he's going back to work at a law office and a school. And no one noticed. Or if they noticed, it wasn't in a way that completely debilitated him mentally. Mike Frozzi says, what do you think about Jack going to America? I suppose anything's possible, but we have to prove it. I'm really not impressed by Robert Graysmith's suspect, John Gibson. There is a suspect out there named Francis Tumblety, who is referred to as the first American serial killer. Jack the Ripper, the first American serial killer. H.H. Holmes as well. I think that the only thing that supports that type of theory, Mike, is that a lot of these suspects were moving around the globe intercontinental travel was so normal back in the 1800s. You didn't need visas. And I mean, I can give you countless Jack the Ripper suspects who have been moving about the globe. I just told you two of them, John Gibson, Francis Tumblety. You also have Carl Feigenbaum, was a sailor. You have people like Frederick Bailey Deeming going from Australia and about. And get this, there are the two suspects named John Gibson. Andrew John Gibson was in England at the time, then goes to Australia and is sometimes referred to as Australia's Jack the Ripper. Frederick Bailey Deeming is also called Australia's Jack the Ripper. Moving about the globe was completely normal. And then you have the Russian suspects like Alexander Pedachenko, Vasily Konovalov, and, you know, that was something that was very normal. But we have to prove it. I see insufficient evidence. Casbah says, good movie, but TV and movies add info that's not real. Part of the script writings, but BB War will be great, a voiceover for a movie. Well, I don't know about that, Casbah, but it's hard to live up to some of the people. Like, I was watching Forensic Files today, right? And the guy who does the narrations for Forensic Files is one of the best of all time. I don't know if I could ever live up to somebody like that. I mean, that's not even a movie or anything. That's just a 22-minute TV show with commercials that expands to 30 minutes. But I love the way that programs like that are presented. And I'm thinking that YouTube is going to do a lot more of that. And I was influenced by some other discussions when people were talking about how YouTube is going to evolve in the future. You might see some YouTubers out there that have way bigger and flashier productions than Black Box Online Radio. You can still hit the like button and subscribe. I wouldn't mind if you did. But YouTube is going to get way beyond that stuff. Way beyond things like Mr. Beast. Way beyond just things about YouTubers that have professional editing. It's going to be almost like you're watching studio delivered content. You might be watching something that could just as easily be an episode of Forensic Files or 48 Hours, done exclusively by independent content creators. Bring that future on. And Mike Frozzi says there was a documentary about it. That's why I mention it. You mean that there was a documentary about Jack the Ripper going to America? Certainly. H.H. Holmes was the first Jack the Ripper suspect that I learned about that had this type of American connection. Now, Mike, it provides an explanation as to what happened. I don't believe the Ripper committed any crimes after 1888 because some people think that the Jack Ripper went on to commit more murders. He just got sloppy, murdering Rose Milett on December 20th of that year, then murdering Alice Mackenzie the next year, and Francis Coles in 1891. I think that there's insufficient evidence to support that. And if I've done one thing on Ripper Wednesday, it's that I've been able to look at this commonly held belief that people have that murder was not that common in Whitechapel. Yeah, it kind of was. More and more crimes get talked about. Or let's look at this in a better way. Murder was not that common in London. Yes, it was. Now, Whitechapel, maybe not as extremely, but there's just more and more murder stories that I hear about. There are more and more murder stories that I hear about when I'm looking at San Francisco. And I was just talking about this on Zodiac Monday when I was reading about the murder of Jackie Truss and how that crime could have inspired the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card because he's almost writing the details of her murder in the Halloween card. And that was most likely a serial killer. Or there are 3 similar style murders that were done in the Jack the Ripper tradition committed in San Francisco in 1970. Paul Avery reported on them. Murder happens a lot more frequently than people think. So why did the murder stop? Yeah, Jack the Ripper could have moved to America. And you even have Dr. Crippen operating, what's that, about 20 years later? That was his whole getaway plan. First go to Belgium, and then to America. Cowpoke says, murder was just common everywhere, even in small, safe towns. Look at old newspapers. The past is wild. Yeah, totally. Totally. Casbah says 100% YouTube is getting bigger than TV. I think it might reach that at some point. What I've noticed is that very rich operations are investing in YouTube. Like, you will see a show that's done on a channel that isn't operated by the host. and they might even have a celebrity hosting a podcast on a channel that isn't owned by that celebrity. And this podcast channel just has like 5 or 6 other celebrities all hosting under the same umbrella network. They have a network on YouTube. It's brilliant. More power to them. Bring it on. Although, part of me, though, really just doesn't want to go beyond the old ways. You guys can see the Black Box Online Radio isn't a flashy production or anything. I mean, and some of it's done by design. I really don't like to use a bunch of sound effects and music because I like just the continuous vibe of the narration. That's the stuff that I like to listen to. That's why I do it that way. But I've always wanted this channel to be focused on the ideas, on the talking, doing things like this, the live chat where I can interact with you guys. And you don't need flashy graphics for that. It's just about, it's about the content. It's about the source material. It's about what you're talking about in the episode. And overall, though, I talk about 3 major stories here on Black Box Online Radio: the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and D.B. Cooper. And I've mentioned all of them in this episode. And the sad thing is that all of these cases are becoming less and less likely to be solved. Jack the Ripper is an uphill battle, but I'll be talking about that a lot tomorrow on Ripper Wednesday, about ways to solve the Jack the Ripper case. Please tune in. The Zodiac Killer, the forensic evidence is questionable. D.B. Cooper, maybe. That's the one I'm most optimistic about. They just made a new discovery on D.B. Cooper's tie recently, that they've discovered a new particle, and it's called cumberlandite. Maybe you saw the video and announcement by Eric Eulis. And they're just like, it only comes from certain geographic regions. Is this a clue? I'm less and less optimistic about the particles on D.B. Cooper's tie, like titanium, calcium, all of them. I read off the whole list once. Actually, I have a whole standalone episode on the secret evidence of D.B. Cooper's tie. Please feel free to check out some of the content on Black Box Online Radio. Almost 2,000 episodes here on this channel. But I think that might be a wild goose chase, the particles on the tie. What if it just means that, this guy got the particles on his tie for a different reason? What if they were just on his hands because he was handling something that wasn't his? What if he was in the presence of some place where he wasn't normally supposed to be? Challenge question to you, everybody in the chat. What was D.B. Cooper doing on November 23rd of 1971? I'm waiting. Where was D.B. Cooper before Portland, Oregon? I'm waiting. Do you know? If you did, we could probably solve the case. I mean, the best answer that I heard for that is, wasn't even my direct challenge question, but Pat Boland was a guest on this program, and I had the opportunity to interview her, and she was expecting that D.B. Cooper was dropped off at the airport by somebody else. No bus tickets, no train tickets, nothing of that sort. Dropped off at the airport by someone giving him a ride. That's the best explanation that I've heard because it leaves the least amount of evidence. Now, did that person provide the sources of the metallic particles on D.B. Cooper's tie? I don't know. So I'm definitely not all excited about finding out that there's cumberlandite on D.B. Cooper's tie and it's some type of earth-shattering revelation. No. But what do you guys think? And you can put your comments down below. And also, do you have anything to say about John Emil List as a D.B. Cooper suspect, or anything about the John Emil List murders? I would love to read your responses. And please tune in tomorrow for an episode about Jack the Ripper. It's going to be a big one, but not overly big, more just like reasonably big. I don't know if that's good or bad, but there's a lot to say about Jack the Ripper that's going to be coming out tomorrow. Oh, Casbah says you're in Rhode Island near the rock site, the one that where Eric Eulis did the video. Is that right? All right, maybe you can go out and get some cumberlandite, put it under a microscope, let me know what you find. But this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning will be winding down. And this Friday, I will be playing the second part of my interview that I did with Brian Burns of the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel. And I'm going to give you guys a concluding segment. I think that John Emil List was almost certainly not D.B. Cooper. But what has actually interested me is that how I had this reversal about E. Howard Hunt. E. Howard Hunt resembles the composite sketches more closely. He perhaps had possibly trained to jump in a suit and tie in the past. He had skydiving experience, whereas John Emil List most likely did not. He also would be the type of person that a government would cover up for. I mean, possibilities as opposed to, certifiable conclusions. But I'd love to know what you guys think about any of the DB Cooper suspects. And, please tune in for a new episode on Cooper Friday. That will be all for me now. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning with me, Black Box Ned. And I'll also be going live again on Thursday. You can follow this show on Facebook. I have a Facebook page for Black Box Online Radio. You can also get my personal Facebook, Ned Dahan. On Instagram and TikTok, I am BlackBoxNed88. And anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. That'll be all for me now, and I'll see you guys next time, okay? Until next time.